And welcome back to the Advent series, and today is December 8th, and today we talk about France as Thebes. In classical Greek mythology, Thebes is the setting for a lot of events that are familiar to us. The tragedy of Oedipus comes to mind with the subsequent events of the Seven against Thebes, and the trial and death of Princess Antigone. Even in actual history, the story of Thebes is as remarkable. We are looking at a city-state that threw its lot with the Persians when they invaded the Greek mainland, constantly sought the harshest punishments against their enemies, namely Athens, became a military innovator, and took down the seemingly invincible power that was Sparta. It had the balls to stand up to Philip and Alexander, and, greatly miscalculated, ended up being destroyed. I mean, to me, reading about the destruction of Thebes and Arians' wars at Alexander made me think of the Greek tragedies centered around the city. I mean, it seemed to me that, the fact was finally catching up with fiction. All the fucked up things that they were doing in the dramatic world had materialized in the real one. I mean, Thebes is such a fascinating topic for me. The other cities in the Hellenic world are either portrayed heroically or in a sympathetic light. Athens, for instance, may have come across as the aggressor during the Peloponnesian War for its treatment of its allies, but nevertheless it was cast in a way that we still rooted for them because of their legacy as the cradle of democracy and drama. The Spartans, for all their stoic and soldierly demeanor, have always held such a heroic image in the minds of moderns because they represented the best. I mean, the movie 300 certainly furthered that agenda. But Thebes has consistently, at least in literature and history, been portrayed in such a negative light. I mean, even when they produced such figures as Pelopidas and Epaminondas, who were truly military innovators, overall the perception of Thebes as the red-headed stepchild we seldom speak of remains. I mean, it would seem that literature and history work against them. I mean, will anyone speak up in their defense? Will anyone rehabilitate their reputation? But no. Alexander saw to it when he razed it to the ground, albeit with regret afterwards. But I began to look at it another way. Sure, Thebes can be the epicenter of crazy things, but for me their position seems to have been born out of pragmatism. I mean, the siding with the Persians was due to survival. Their alliance with the Spartans seems, in hindsight, a rather wise decision because the Peloponnesians came out on top. And their boldness to stand up and take down Sparta was one hell of a move, and I tip my hat off to them. They took the military playbook and flipped it on its head and gave the once formidable Spartans a run for their money. However, that luck ran out when they decided to challenge Macedon and ended up paying the price for it. I mean, yes, it was a tragic end, and yes, it was a rather stupid move on their part. But admittedly, there is a twinge of understanding for what they did because they were motivated by survival. So, how does France figure into this? I mean, the title of this essay is France as Thebes. I will posit that France has had one of the most interesting histories in the world. Furthermore, its ideological legacies have directly impacted the course of events in other countries. When I look at French history, I truly scratch my head and read on eagerly. The succession crisis in the 100 Years' War was a callback to the Seven against Thebes. The actions of Cardinal Richelieu, Mazarin, and Talleyrand echoed the pragmatism of the Thebans in their political maneuvering. And the Vichy regime can be seen as a modern retelling of Macedon taking down Thebes. The French also have a reputation that isn't always kindly received. I remember reading Paul Cartledge's book, Thebes, the Forgotten City, and he mentioned how the Athenians looked down on the Thebans, here called the Boeotians, seeing them as bumpkins. Indeed, the stories set in the city do them no favors, and their actions in the past do not encourage trust, even if they seem self-serving. We can look at the French, and the majority would not have an entirely favorable view, even seeing them as cheese-eating surrender monkeys, to quote groundskeeper Willie from The Simpsons. But is it well-deserved? Just as with the Thebans, we must look at things more closely, because it isn't as clear-cut as expected. I mean, we can look at the 100 Years' War, for example, and see the French as the underdogs as they fought off the English invaders and were, at one point, nearly subsumed by English hegemony on their own soil. Then came Joan of Arc, who rallied the beleaguered French forces, and they managed to drive out the invaders and reclaim and unite the kingdom under one crown. The heroine of the story eventually became a saint in the Catholic Church, and France emerged stronger and centralized as a result. They even became military innovators with a streamlined logistics process thanks to the Bureau brothers, and an army that was shifting away from the levy system to a standing professional one, not to mention state-of-the-art artillery that made them formidable. However, we can also look at the French Revolution and the subsequent Reign of Terror in the First French Empire. While its origins were sympathetic, what happened afterwards was appalling. Yes, the government should work for the people and should be accountable to them, but when the one that replaces the old system turns on the people and begins executing without any compunction, it's horrific. To call it an abuse of power is putting it mildly. Furthermore, let us remember that the legacy of the Revolution and the Reign of Terror survived well into the 20th century in Southeast Asia, where most of the countries were formerly French colonies. We only need to remember that Ho Chi Minh and Pol Pot and other cadres studied in France and were very much influenced by the movers and shakers of the revolution that led to regimes that ended up murdering millions of their own people. The language, too, was a tool. During the revolutionary times, people addressed each other as citizen. My mother, having survived the killing fields in Cambodia, told me how people addressed each other as brother or sister, or comrade. I assure you, it wasn't a cultural thing, but very much tied to the revolution's many innovations. And the alterations of the calendar starting from year 1 of the revolution influenced Pol Pot when 1975 became year 0 of their project to create a more perfect agrarian society that went to pot. No pun intended, very quickly. True, the French Revolution had created a republican government, but the way it got there was appalling, and its methods were very much emulated in other times and other places with equally devastating effects. The individuals of French history themselves are fascinating and could make interesting dramas. Cardinal Richelieu, the first minister of France in the 1600s, was very much a good Frenchman. He put his country first and used any means necessary to accomplish it. He was also a man whose religious loyalties seemed mixed. At one point, he went after the Huguenots, a Catholic warring against the rebellious Protestants, but then he signed the Treaty of Barvalda with Sweden, a Lutheran state, to fight the Holy Roman Empire, whose emperor was a firebrand Catholic. You would think that a cardinal, a prince of the church, would be sympathetic to the Catholic cause, but Richelieu went to war with Spain and the Empire, not born out of religious concerns, but political ones. And he got a lot of flack for it, but he placed the needs of the state above his religious loyalty. He saw the Habsburgs as a greater threat to France's survival, and if he found allies willing to knock them down a peg or two, he'd take them. And let's remember that a century earlier, the Empire and Spain had humiliated the French time and time again in the Italian War, so this seemed very much fulfilling to finally force them to the negotiating table. Following 1648, France would emerge as the superpower of Europe, and all of its cultural accoutrements would become the standards by which all things are measured. And if you think about it, France finally got the last laugh. During the Napoleonic era, the Holy Roman Empire, that was once its most formidable foe, had come to an end. The empire that had once been the bane of the French state had collapsed after 1,000 years of existence, but France carried on, either as a kingdom or a republic. I could go on about French history. One can look at President Macron's personal life and see some sort of Oedipus thing going on. But the point I'm trying to convey is that France, just like Thebes, is a state peopled by pragmatic individuals whose aims we cannot fully read and whose history is riddled with events that make them both sympathetic and repulsive. You can see how both endured numerous wars, innovated their military, and would emerge as the hegemonic power of their respective political spheres. Their legacies and reputations among contemporaries were not favorable, but nevertheless we cannot bring ourselves to look away. For all their quirks, their faults, and their aims, they are a subject of fascination, and they earn our attention. If nothing else, they have done the things we dare not do, and can become lessons for how to best navigate the waters ahead.